Pioneer brand canola with Optimum Gly, the highest yielding glyphosate tolerant trait on the market. What's next in canola happens here.
Let's talk markets. We're joined right now by Ranulf Glanville. He is with Grainfox, based out of Ontario, Canada. Ranulf, how are we doing today?
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, hey, lots happening. You know what? I think we can say here, talking broadly about the corn and bean market right now. Corn, you look at the December chart, Ranulf, we are trying to sort of gradually work our way higher. It, is this an encouraging sign, or what is the market telling you here right now?
Absolutely. It's a very encouraging sign. I think that if we look at the corn futures market, it's moving up from the lows made in late summer. And this is fantastic. It tells us that a lot of the news about the big US crops, the big corn crop, the big soybean crop, these were actually in the market before harvest even really got going in the US. So it's a very encouraging setup for anybody in those markets.
And with we're kind of at harvest time. Obviously, we're not we've got a long ways to go when it comes to the corn harvest, but kind of unseasonal. Is that the way to describe this move to the upside?
Absolutely. When you talk about the corn market, everybody knows, quote unquote, that corn doesn't bottom in August. Corn bottoms in November or early December when the US harvest reaches, let's say, 60 to 70% complete. And 9 years out of 10, those tendencies that everybody hears about from the time they're just a little person at their farmer and father and mother's knees on the farm, those hold. The time when it doesn't tend to hold, those seasonal odds can get distorted is in very big crop years. And that's actually what we're in this year in the US. If you've been tracking the USDA with their yield forecasts, their production forecasts, it's just been heavy, heavy, heavy all through the summer. And so we get to the point where the market actually starts to form a low before we would normally think of it. And that's something we tried to talk about a little bit on some of our Grainfox podcasts as the summer was going along. And now it's encouraging that it does seem to be happening.
In the old bottoms can become the new tops once we break through those thresholds. You look at the December corn, it kind of looks like we may have a bit of a resistance on this move upwards if we potentially got in that 450, 455 range. Is that kind of what you see on December corn?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're already starting to see a little bit of resistance in the 425 area and 450. There should be more resistance. Just sort of scanning not just the December daily chart, but some of the weekly charts. That 450 area is a sort of a roundish number that a lot of farmers are going to be drawn to for sales. So I think the message is to be optimistic, but still cautiously so. The other thing I would point out is that notwithstanding all the things I just said about the market performing quite well, we still have, as of Sunday, 79% of the US corn crop to come off and almost all the Canadian grain corn crop. So this is billions and billions of bushels that have yet to cross the scales. So it is quite possible that these markets could correct at some point. That's certainly something we'll be watching for.
Yeah, and if you do think you need to take some risk off the table, maybe don't wait for the 450. Maybe maybe here or maybe at 440 where you put your targets. But yeah, I always cautious about like I think it's going to get to 450, and you put your target at 450, and we get to 447, something like that.
Yeah, I would
That's
agree with that.
regrettable.
There's a great saying that, everybody sees the same charts. And if you're sitting back from across the room and you're saying, well, 450 is the natural target, the problem is that chances are a lot of other people are seeing the same thing. So anytime we're talking targets for a sale, I don't love round figures, and I would generally try to put it a little bit below where you anticipate everybody else is if it's important to you to sell. And that's kind of the way you framed it a few moments ago. I think there are lots of people who will be looking to add to sales into this rally. That may be people that don't have storage for all their corn, people who want to generate some cash flow. or people who are choosing to store other crops and simply don't have the space for their corn.
Yeah, and we've been talking mainly about corn here, but soybeans have been trying to move, do the same sort of step progress upwards. Are soybeans coming up for the same reasons as corn?
Yeah, the one thing I should have mentioned in the corn section also that definitely relates to soybeans is these rallies are partially being driven by short covering or repositioning by the speculative funds.
Oh, I like
And
that.
so what they're doing is they were heavily short at the lows in the summer, and now they're repositioning. That's adding to this rally. Also, this same concept applies for soybeans that a lot of the news about the heavy US supply appeared to be in the market before harvest began. The one thing I would say about soybeans also that they still have a lot of potential to feel some harvest pressure. The US harvest was only, I believe, 26% done as of Sunday. So there again, billions and billions of bushels yet to come.
Yeah, and that makes sense on the short covering because if you look at, say, the November canola chart, it's not the same pattern. It's far more choppier, which tells you there's different things that it's not just the general oilseed complex moving higher for fundamental reasons. There's other things at play here. Is that fair?
100%. So canola is one of those markets where prices have come up from their lows. Maybe they just got oversold a few weeks ago. But if you look at the fund positioning in canola, they're actually almost as short now as they've been any time in the past 5 or more years. So still really negatively positioned in canola, and there's obviously fundamental reasons for that. One of which is ongoing harvest in Western Canada, another of which is the Vancouver port situation, which now thankfully appears to be resolved or headed towards a
Yep.
resolution. So that's going to take a little bit of pressure off canola. But then in the background, we still have this whole trade situation with China lurking. And so that's why I think canola justifiably has lagged some of the gains in, let's say, soybeans.
There's a lot of rumors floating around that, China could put duties on Canadian canola in November, December. I had somebody else tell me January. Who knows what the story is? Obviously, it's something that the industry is concerned about. E- Is that kind of anticipation of a bad result? Is that priced into the market, or is the market waiting to know what that actual amount would be, or how do you see this?
Well, I guess my take on it, I love what you said about the uncertainty because there is considerable uncertainty, not only how China will proceed, when they will proceed, how serious any repercussions would be. With all that in mind, the thing I would say is the initial reaction from canola futures was extremely negative. The market slammed to new lows when the news first came out. We did see sort of a snapback, a yo-yo effect, which is normal because China didn't immediately follow through and initiate the anti-dumping investigation and get the process moving towards a clearly punitive outcome. So the futures bounced back, and now they're in this sort of wait and see mode. The working assumption that we've had at Grainfox is that China is likely to proceed, unfortunately, because we don't see the Canadian government flip-flopping on some of the issues that appear to be behind this situation with China. So it is quite likely China will proceed, but we're being very cautious about trying to guess when and how significantly this will impact the export program for Canadian canola because there are a lot of unknowns. I think in the export program, we've already seen a bit of front loading of business
Yes.
where through the first, let's say, 7 weeks of the CGC data, exports of canola actually got off to a pretty good start.
Yeah, Western Grain Elevator Association said exactly that relative to the Port of Vancouver terminal strike, right? That there was a lot of canola trying to get front loaded and get out of here, but before there was any sort of a duty applied, which makes a lot of sense, and we should see those export numbers be higher. What's going on in South America? What's the update there? Because this is the time that we hear a lot about it, and it has an impact on these markets here back at home.
Yeah, great question. So if the US and Canada are today's news, South America is tomorrow's news. And the reason I say that is a few things about South America, and they'll really become the market factor moving into, let's say, December, January, February, when South American yields and production are really being determined. The expectation for South America as a whole is for a huge soybean crop and for a very large corn crop. And so part of that is being built into our prices, our markets, that there's this looming production bulge in the Southern Hemisphere, specifically Brazil and Argentina. But something interesting is happening, and that is that as farmers are well aware, Mother Nature will have the final say on all this. And there's been some early dryness problems in northern Brazil. It's too early to matter. I mean, this is akin to a problem in Canada in April or March, but it's creating a little bit of excitement and a little bit of an idea that maybe not everything is a done deal in South America. And so Brazil's been dry in September. There are better rains in the forecast for the second half of October, but obviously confidence looking at it far out is a little bit low. And so I think that's going to feed into some volatility in terms of what happens with these markets moving forward.
Yeah, and we just like here, we try to kill the crop 2 or 3 times, and there's this information discovery process that goes on, and the market trying to sort out what's real, what's not, and it's until the combines start to roll, it's hard to know for sure. But before we wrap up here, what are some other things in the market that you're watching here right now that farmers need to be aware of and stay on top of as well?
Well, there's a lot of other things going on. I guess one of the first things I would say that is of general interest to the markets is that China came out with a huge stimulus package last week. And a
Massive.
farmer might say, well, why do I care? That doesn't really matter. China has the world's second largest economy, and the Chinese stock market has reacted tremendously to this, posting the most gains in 9 days in the history of the Chinese stock market. So it means that optimism in China and about China is increasing. This doesn't tell us immediately that China is going to line up and buy more Canadian pork, or that they're going to, turn their cheek in terms of canola or other things. But it's certainly a positive signal for global markets, not just stock markets, but for commodities in general, given China's massive size. The other thing I would say is we're into a series of interest rate cuts in Canada and the United States. Again, a lot of farmers will say, well, why is this of interest? And the reason it's of interest, there are literally billions and billions of dollars of debt rolling over in the coming year, not just residential debt or farm debt, but really across the spectrum. So this is going to be a very interesting story to track in the year ahead. And then for a market like wheat, I think there's a lot of fascinating things going on in terms of a country like Russia, which is seeing dryness in parts of their southern growing regions, excess rain in other areas. Ukraine is having problems with dryness as they plant winter wheat. So it's always a very dynamic wheat market globally. And I think when I look at the wheat market for Canadians, we've seen a bit of a rally off the summer lows. And that's a market where I think there's the potential for more strength ahead when we look into later in the marketing year.
Fascinating stuff. Ranulf, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Keep up the great work at Grainfox. If somebody wants more information on Grainfox, how do they find it?
www.grainfox.ca, and certainly we'd welcome trials and requests for more information.
Yeah.